let's talk about arguably the single most important topic that we will cover all semester. If we do not comprehend homeostasis, we don't understand the value of homeostasis, we're going to have trouble understanding why all other things are occurring within the body, specifically as it has to do with human physiology. Homeostasis is the maintenance of specific variables within our body. And we'll outline some of these variables in a moment here. But the goal is to maintain within a steady state, that things don't get too out of whack, too much of one thing, too little of another thing. That is homeostasis. It's the maintenance of what is often referred to as a dynamic equilibrium within a specific range. To be clear, homeostasis is maintained by negative feedback. There is nothing bad about the process of negative feedback. It is not bad. It is necessary to maintain a number of variables within our body.
Let's look at some of these
homeostatic variables. They include body temperature, fluid volume, ion concentrations, nutrients, oxygen, osmolarity, blood pressure, heart rate, and body pH. Now, the goal here within homeostasis is to maintain these variables within a specific range. And I'm not going to talk about the specific ranges of each of these, but let's just take body temperature as an example. The acceptable range of body temperature is 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. If the body temperature goes below that, say 92 degrees Fahrenheit, or above it, let's say 102 degrees Fahrenheit, both of those states are out of the acceptable range, and they need to be brought back within the range. In this case, it's 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. Body temperature is a variable that's significantly important and needs to be homeostatically regulated. Fluid volumes and ion concentrations, which are intimately tied to each other. Anytime you see the word concentrations, that is the relationship between solutes and a solvent. The universal solvent in our body is water. Solutes are anything suspended in fluid, which is generally our blood plasma or extracellular fluid, and certainly the intracellular fluid. But when we talk about ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, and chloride, among others, we are more concerned about their concentrations rather than specifically their quantities. Their quantities play a part, as does the volume of water, but it's the relationship between the ions and the fluid volume, which is related to osmolarity, which I have on the upper right of this screen. Osmolarity is a measurement of the solute concentration in solution, and we will detail these as we move forward. Nutrients need to be homeostatically regulated, such as proteins, lipids, carbohydrates. Arguably, the single most important carbohydrate in our body is glucose. Glucose needs to be held at a specific range, which is 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter, and that is fasting glucose. Those are the fasting glucose levels. They would be different after a meal. But if we just take the fasting glucose range, it's 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. If the glucose gets below that, it needs to be brought back up into the homeostatic range of 80 to 100. Bringing it back to the homeostatic range is what is known as negative feedback. If we have elevated blood glucose levels, there are mechanisms to bring it back down into the homeostatic range. That is also negative feedback. Oxygen certainly needs to be within a specific range, and that's probably the most intuitive one of all of these, because we all know that if we don't have enough oxygen, we're going to have some serious problems. Blood pressure and heart rate, which are very related to each other. The goal of the heart and the associated blood vessels with the pressure is to distribute oxygen and nutrients throughout our body, and it's also related to heat. So those are homeostatically regulated. pH is significantly important in our body. It is the measurement of the hydrogen ion concentration. Once again, the definition of pH is the measurement of the hydrogen ion concentration. And that is, the range is 7.38 to 7.42. We're going to have a whole video on this. But to be clear, the hydrogen ion concentration has to be regulated within that range. Okay, so let's look at the control system which regulates homeostasis or feedback loops. I should suggest that this control system applies for both positive and negative feedback, but for now we're just going to focus on negative feedback. So this control system can happen at the local level to a specific tissue in the body without consideration to other areas, or it can happen systemically, that is to say system-wide or body-wide. So we have local control systems and systemic control systems, which generally have the same basic parts, with the exception the local control system does not utilize the same integrating center. The integrating center for the systemic control system is going to be the brain. The integrating center for a local feedback loop or control system are going to be the cells within that region or tissue. So let's just look at some examples here. There's a stimulus, and we will go to blood glucose levels. If blood glucose is 65 milligrams per deciliter when fasting, then that's out of the acceptable range. And it needs to be brought back up to 80 to 100 milligrams per deciliter. So the stimulus is diminish blood glucose levels. A signal is going to go up to the brain. The brain's going to process that information and determine what needs to happen. The pathway from the stimulus to the brain is what's known as the input signal. The brain decides what needs to happen. It's going to send an output signal to a target organ. In this case, let's suggest the target organ is the liver. It could be other areas of the body, but the liver stores a large molecule known as glycogen, which we've talked about previously. Glycogen is a storage molecule for glucose. It's just a bunch of glucose linked together, and it is stored, among other places, in the liver. So the integrating center, the brain, is going to send a signal to the liver saying, you need to break down that glucose. You need to break down that glycogen to liberate the glucose, put it into the blood, and get an increase in blood glucose levels. And that is the body's response, is an increase in blood glucose levels. To be clear, I'm not suggesting increasing blood glucose levels outside or above the acceptable range. I'm just suggesting bringing it back up to the acceptable range. The same holds true if we had elevated blood glucose levels. If we had a stimulus that was elevated blood glucose levels, then the body's response would be to decrease blood glucose levels by creating more glycogen or fat stores within the body. And we'll talk about the whole process of how that plays out in a later video, actually later in the semester. But the point here, what I've just described in both of those, is negative feedback, because the body's response is moving that variable in the opposite direction of the original stimulus. Now, this can happen locally as well without going up to the brain. And let's just take a tissue anywhere in the body, let's say the small intestine, that's exhibiting hypoxia. Hypoxia is diminished oxygen perfusion to that tissue. It needs more oxygen to sustain itself. A local system can deal with that on its own. Blood vessels are going to release a signaling molecule known as nitric oxide, which causes blood vessels to get larger. That is known as vasodilation, where the diameter of the blood vessel gets larger. When the diameter of a blood vessel gets larger, it increases blood flow or perfusion to a specific area. And fortunately, the blood is carrying oxygen. So the more blood flow to a tissue, the more oxygen that goes to the tissue. So if that tissue initially had diminished oxygen levels, the body's response is to increase the oxygen levels to the tissue. That's the local example of a negative feedback loop. So just so we're on the same page with negative feedback, I'm going to use one more example, and that's body temperature. If we are cold, that is to say our body temperature is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, that's significantly below the acceptable range of 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. A signal is going to be sent, an input signal. There's going to be a stimulus of diminished body temperature, an input signal to the brain. The brain's going to process that information because it is the integrating center. And it's going to send an output signal to our skeletal muscles. Our skeletal muscles are going to start contracting very rigorously and very rapidly to create what we know as shivering. And that is going to increase body temperature. Don't worry about the mechanism on why it increases body temperature, but it certainly does, and that is the response. The initial stimulus was diminished body temperature. The response is to increase body temperature. Once again, to increase it back into the acceptable range of 97 to 99 degrees Fahrenheit. The same applies if someone is super hot, say 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That's out of the acceptable range. So our body has mechanisms to deal with that. One is sweating, which is going to cool the body down. My point in this example is if we have elevated body temperature, the body's response is to bring that back down into the acceptable range. That is also negative feedback. One thing I want you to notice, these arrows are going in opposite directions. That is what makes it negative feedback. Okay, let's talk about a classic positive feedback example. Here, we are looking at a woman, a pregnant woman. We see a fetus within the uterus. The black line right here is representing the uterus, which is the organ a fetus, an embryo and fetus develops within. Right here is the brain. This yellow structure is the spinal cord. This blue line is representing a nerve fiber that will be sending a signal up to the brain. And the red line with an arrow on it, labeled 4, is representing a signaling molecule specifically known as a hormone, a neurohormone known as oxytocin. Oxytocin is released from the posterior pituitary gland. During childbirth, after roughly 38 months, when that baby's ready to come out, it's going to stretch the uterus, which is going to send a signal to the brain. That's the blue line number 2. The specific area is going to be the posterior pituitary, which releases oxytocin. The purpose of oxytocin being released is to initiate uterine contractions. Oxytocin is acting upon the muscle of the uterus known as the myometrium. When the myometrium contracts, it squeezes on that baby to try to deliver that baby. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen that easily and that quickly. The squeezing of the baby is going to stretch the uterus, send another signal up to the brain to release more oxytocin to cause more uterine contractions, which is going to send another signal up to the brain to release more oxytocin to cause more uterine contractions. This keeps happening and happening and happening, and those arrows are going in the same direction. We have release of oxytocin, which causes uterine contractions, which causes the release of more oxytocin, more uterine contractions, the release of more oxytocin, and more uterine contractions. This is positive feedback because those arrows are going in the same direction. We're going to look at a number of examples of positive feedback. One is going to be platelet activation during some sort of laceration or blood loss in the body. In short, what happens is platelets get activated to the area where the hemorrhage is occurring. And the platelets are going to release signaling molecules to attract more platelets to the area, because the more platelets there are, the better chances of stopping that bleed. More platelets come to the area, which those platelets secrete more signaling molecules, to attract more platelets. Those platelets secrete the same signaling molecule to attract more platelets. And it's a very efficient way to initiate the cessation of that bleed. One thing I want to point out with positive feedback does not maintain homeostasis. But that doesn't mean positive feedback is bad. Positive feedback may maintain life as we know it, but it doesn't maintain specific ranges of homeostatic variables. Okay, like I said at the outset, homeostasis is often referred to as a dynamic equilibrium, or which is an oxymoron, because equilibrium is implying some sort of stasis or stability, while dynamic is suggesting change. But dynamic equilibrium is trying to stress that we are maintaining variables within specific ranges. For example, body temperature. Body temperature is not ever described as needing to be 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. There is an acceptable range. Same thing with blood glucose levels. So it is a dynamic equilibrium. If our body gets out of that dynamic equilibrium, it's when we get sick or worse, die. So in 1978, there was a famous tightrope walker named Carl Valenda. And Carl Valenda was the patriarch of a large family of trapeze artists and tightrope walkers. And in 1978, Carl had a tightrope set up between two high-rises in Puerto Rico. He's walking across that tightrope and he fell and died. And the reason Carl Valenda died was the same reason we are all going to die, because our body gets out of balance. Now, certainly for all of us when we die, and it's not a topic we generally like to talk about, there's going to be many other variables involved. But the crux of it is that our body gets out of balance and is not able to maintain homeostasis.